Phoebe, welcome to the Backlog Quest. Today's book is The Towering Sky by Katherine McGee, the third and final book in the Thousandth trilogy. I do have spoilers for the entire series in this overview. I discovered this series because the first book piqued my interest when I saw it on the shelf at my local shop. I ended up purchasing a Kindle copy because the book was cheaper for a digital copy than it was for the physical copy. I continued with the Kindle copy for the second and third book. I often find that the paperback is cheaper than the Kindle copy, so I always like to double check for the books that I don't care if I have a physical copy or not. This is a trilogy that I recommend reading all three books together, especially if you have a terrible memory like I do. I read the first two books when they came out and the final book in March of this year, months after that book was released. With those big gaps, I wouldn't remember who most of the characters were, which wasn't helped by the books having a large cast of characters. Often I was several chapters in before I'd remember the story of the person the chapter was about and how they related to everyone. Calliope and Rylan were the two characters in the third book that I had the most trouble remembering who they were. I got Leda, Avery, and Eris confused with one another for a little bit. Spoilers for the first book, I knew it was Eris that died, but I kept getting her backstory confused with Avery and Leda. And at least those three characters were in the same friend group, so their stories did intertwine the most out of everyone in the book. Once I got my head around all the characters and remembered all their individual stories, I was able to enjoy the overall story much more, and seeing those different threads for each character weaving together and slowly closing up was great. All three books in this series start the same way, with someone dying. In the first two books, we do not know who that someone is until further into the book. This book was a little different because we know that character is Avery. Each book in the trilogy tells its own story. While they are telling one big story, each book has an individual story, something that I appreciated because I've read far too many trilogies and series where the books felt like it should have all been in one book, or the middle book didn't tell its own story, which the middle book in this story definitely does. It does tell its own story. I love the growth that's shown by all the characters. It felt like I was watching them grow from teenagers to adults in the three books. Katherine McGee does an excellent job with the characterization of the characters and weaving their stories together to tell a large overarching story. I loved Watt and his illegal supercomputer Nadia, and how Watt starts to realise that he's been relying too much on Nadia and sort of lost himself along the way. Leda telling her father that she knows Eris is his daughter and her half-sister, and that lifts part of her guilt over Eris's death off her chest, and she recognises that guilt will never be gone, but she can move past it and not spiral out of control as she has been for all of Book 2 and most of Book 3. Avery trying to move on from loving her adoptive brother Atlas and failing. Calliope, who just wants to be herself but doesn't know who that is anymore because she's been pretending to be too many other people for so long, and feeling confined in the life that she's pretending to live. Calliope was the character that had the most disconnect from the story of all the other characters. Her character just didn't seem to be that relevant to most of the other characters, and I felt that her story could have been told through other characters than seeing her point of view. She just felt out of place when I was reading compared to everyone else in the story. She did intertwine, and it did end up playing a part towards the end, but even her part, as disconnected as it was, and even though it was a catalyst for Avery making a change to her own life, I felt that it could have been done more from other characters' perspectives than her own perspective. I knew Calliope's story would weave in eventually, and I was constantly looking for that. How does she interact with everyone else? How is she relevant? Where does her story interconnect? And I did eventually get all that, but it was just... I think her story would have been better as a novella type story rather than being intertwined into the main story as it was. But that's just my opinion. Just what I felt when I was reading it and reading her point of views, and I struggled not to go and skim through her point of views. Rylan trying to work out her relationships with Cord and Hyrel and knowing that she does love them both, but that she also cannot let other people just make the decisions for her all the time when it comes to her relationships, that she has to be able to make decisions as well for herself and shows her maturity as she realizes what was wrong with her relationships in the past and that she can move forward. I like Katherine McGee's form of storytelling. I love that she has a vast number of characters and she makes them work. I could really see the world that she had set up. It seemed all glittery and perfect utopia at the start of the books, and over the course of the first book, the cracks start to appear in the utopia. And the world isn't perfect, the characters are not perfect, and I found something that I could relate to in all the characters, even those super rich who have lives that I'll never have, and I even found something in the character of Calliope to relate to, even though she was my hardest one to find a connection with. Katherine McGee's writing is really easy to read. All these books held my interest, and she's an author that I'll be checking out her future works. This is a series I eventually would like to revisit and reread with all the books in one go. There will not be a massive wait until my next book overview, unlike this time where my last video was in March and this one's in August. Next week, I'll be talking about the Christian devotional book, My Time with God, Renew His Presence Daily by Joyce Meyer. And that is another book added to my completed pile in my quest to reduce my backlog of unread books.